Welcome to today's lecture on ancient societies on the Mediterranean. Long before the rise of classical Greece and Rome, the shores and islands of the Mediterranean were home to remarkable civilizations that shaped the course of history. Among these were the Hittites, the Phoenicians, and the Minoans, three cultures whose innovations, trade networks, and artistic achievements left an enduring legacy across the ancient world. In this lecture, we'll explore the Hittites, masters of Anatolia and formidable rivals of Egypt, known for their advanced use of iron and their influential legal codes. We'll journey to the bustling ports of the Phoenicians, renowned seafarers and traders whose alphabet laid the groundwork for many modern writing systems, and we'll step into the vibrant world of the Minoans on the island of Crete, whose palatial architecture, vivid frescoes, and mysterious scripts hint at a sophisticated society thriving amid the waves of the Aegean. By examining these civilizations, we'll see how cultural exchange, technological development, and artistic expression intertwined across the Mediterranean, creating connections that would resonate for centuries to come. Let's dive in and uncover the stories of these fascinating peoples. The Hittites were an ancient Anatolian people who established an empire at Hattusa in northern central Anatolia around 1600 BCE. The Hittite Empire reached its height during the mid-14th century BCE under Suppiluliuma I, when it encompassed an area that included most of Asia Minor as well as parts of the northern Levant and upper Mesopotamia. After 1180 BCE, the empire came to an end during the Bronze Age collapse and splintered into several independent Neo-Hittite city-states, some of which survived until the 8th century BCE. The Hittite language was a member of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European language family. They referred to their native land as Hatti. The conventional name Hittites is due to the initial identification with the biblical Hittites, according to 19th century archaeology. The Hebrew Bible refers to Hittites in several passages and links them to an eponymous ancestor, Heth, a descendant of Ham through his son Canaan. The Hittites are thereby counted among the Canaanites. The Hittites are usually depicted as a people living among the Israelites. Abraham purchases the patriarchal burial plot from Ephron HaChitti, or Ephron the Hittite, and Hittites serve as high military officers in David's army. In 2 Kings 7:6, they are depicted as people with their own kingdoms. Despite the use of Hatti as the core of their territory, the Hittites should be distinguished from the Hattians, an earlier people who inhabited the same region until the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE and spoke a different language, possibly in the Northwest Caucasian language group known as Hattic. As with most, probably all, states of the Bronze Age, the Hittite governing institutions revolved around the king. In early Hittite times, the king's hold on power seems to have not been very secure. There were frequent rebellions, and in particular, the death of a king seems generally to have heralded political crisis. The nobles were a powerful class and jealous of their ancient privileges. This made for tension and frequent conflict between them and the kings, whose interests lay in centralizing as much power in their own hands. One shadowy institution within the Hittite state seems to have been the assembly, which from the slender evidence we have of it seems to have consisted of the nobility. One of its functions seems to have been to act as a court of appeal politically. However, it clearly acted as a focus of opposition to the king. What made this problem a great deal worse was that there seemed to be no clear line of succession from one king to the next. All princes of the royal house, of which there were many, apparently felt themselves eligible to become king, and if they could gain the support of a faction of the nobility, launched a bid for the throne. Finally, one of the kings, Teleponus, issued an edict setting down clear rules of succession. This marked a turning point. From then on, no more is heard of the assembly, and no more is heard of nobles disputing the succession. In the Old Kingdom, the Hittite king was styled Great King, denoting a claim to be overlord of lesser kings. Later, he had the title My Son, a term borrowed from contemporary monarchies in Egypt and Syria. This denoted a ruler endowed with superhuman powers, a hero beloved of the god. This change in title reflects a development in which the status of the king changed from being something like a first among equals, so far as their nobility were concerned, to being more like absolute monarchs of Egypt and Babylon. Although Hittite kings were never actually deified during their lifetimes, on death a king was thought to have become a god, and spirits of former kings received religious devotions. The king was the supreme commander, lawgiver, judge, and priests. Of these roles, only that of judge was regularly delegated to others. He was expected to personally fulfill his military and religious responsibilities in person. Hittite queens had an independent position within the realm. They were high priestesses in the state religion, and some played a prominent role in affairs of the state. The Hittite realm consisted of a homeland surrounded by a growing cluster of kingdoms, owing allegiance to the great king in Hattusa, the Hittite capital. Within the Hittite homeland, most towns and other communities had councils of local elders to look after their affairs. It was also their role to liaise with local Hittite governors or military officers. In the religious centers, the high priest also acted as the civil governor of the community. As the kingdom expanded, more and more conquered kingdoms were brought under Hittite rule. If an enemy king surrendered, the Hittite king was usually content to accept his oath of allegiance, and the former enemy would receive back his kingdom as a vassal. A treaty would be drawn up, and he would undertake to perform all the duties required of him. Where a city resisted and had to be taken by force, the city was sacked, and the inhabitants carried off to the Hittite capital with their cattle. They would then be distributed as serfs amongst the nobility. They were not made into slaves, however. The conquered territory was handed over to a new vassal ruler, usually a Hittite prince. All vassals were given a great deal of autonomy, so long as they rendered tribute and provided troops for the Hittite army. In return, the Hittite king promised to defend them from external enemies and to help keep the ruling family in power. All vassals were prohibited from any independent dealings with foreign kings. As Hittite power expanded, vassal kingdoms in sensitive locations on the frontiers were created for Hittite royal princes. The famous cities of Aleppo and Carchemish in northern Syria were treated in this way. Later, as the empire grew yet larger, generals, who were usually relatives of the king, were appointed to governorships with wide powers over large areas. They acted as intermediaries between the vassal kings and the Hittite great king. At whatever level, the administration of outlying territories involved the repair of roads and public buildings, the upkeep of temples, the dispensation of justice, and the celebration of religious ceremonies. Border vassals were always liable to be seceded or to be forced away from their allegiance by a rival power such as Mitanni, Assyria, or Egypt. Frontiers had constantly to be maintained by force or the threat of force. The Hittites paid a great deal of attention to legal matters. This was perhaps because their kingdom united under one rule a disparate group of local societies, each with their own customs, and the Hittite rulers, therefore, had to provide a code of laws by which to adjudicate issues which arose between people from different localities. Several collections of Hittite laws have been uncovered, each slightly different from one another. They probably reflect different stages of the development, as they often contain the phrase, "Formerly, a certain penalty was in force, but now the king has ordained another," usually less severe, penalty. This indicates that Hittite law was developing over time and not set in stone, as other law codes seem to have been. Like other early bodies of law, there was no distinction between civil and criminal law. It was concerned primarily with preserving law and order by seeking to set out rules of revenge and compensation to avoid individuals and families from taking matters into their own hands. Again, like other law codes, the one crime not included in this was the most serious of all: murder. This was due to the fact that murder was still thought of as being beyond the power of the courts. The law did, however, specify how such a matter was to be resolved, by means of a lord of blood, a relative of the victim who was charged with exacting a suitable penalty. Laws were mostly framed in the form of hypothetical cases followed by an appropriate ruling, worded in such a way that strongly suggests that they were derived from real cases. They were thus seeking to base the law on legal precedents. The Hittites seem to have placed more emphasis than other legal systems of the time on ascertaining the facts in a case. Some court records have survived and show considerable efforts to make detailed inquiries, which have quite a modern ring to them. Hittite law was humane by the standards of the time. The only capital offenses were for rape, intercourse with animals, and defiance of the state. Slaves, as ever, were in the worst position, being liable to the death penalty for disobedience to masters, and sorcery and mutilation for lesser crimes. However, the fact that slaves' crimes and misdemeanors were a matter for the courts rather than simply being left to the whim of their masters was itself an advance on many ancient law codes. For free men and women, the penalty for most crimes was restitution of damaged or stolen property, or compensation for injury, though offenders were often required to pay several times the value of the damage caused. In most cases, the reparation expressed in silver value. Offenders' families, and in some cases their whole communities, were held responsible for discharging the debt thus incurred. Careful distinction was made between violations committed in anger or on purpose and those committed by accident, a distinction not made in some other law codes. In the first instance, cases came before the local elders. In more serious cases, a local royal officer, such as a local garrison commander, would be required to be involved in conjunction with the elders. Appeals went to the king, or in practice more likely his judicial advisors, and also, it seems, to the assembly. The king's decisions seem always to have been required in cases of sorcery, in serious cases of theft, and in all cases involving the death penalty. The core of the Hittite army was the light horse-drawn chariot. Indeed, their chariotry was second to none, especially in later periods. Hittite chariots were probably heavier than those of their enemies, particularly the Egyptians, and appear to have carried 3 men instead of 2. Otherwise, they were very similar in design. The infantry were probably more numerous than the chariots, but played a subordinate role in battle. The active campaigning season was confined to spring and summer. At the beginning of spring, as order for mobilization would be sent out to the territories chosen to take part that year, and a rendezvous named near the relevant frontier. At the appointed time and place, the king would review the army and take command in person. The Hittites were masters of strategy and cunning. They executed feints, marches, and countermarches to confuse the enemy, and before the Battle of Kadesh, succeeded in concealing their whole army from the Egyptians. Their objective was to catch the enemy army in the open, where their chariots would be deployed to maximum effect. The enemy's best hope was to avoid a pitched battle, disperse his troops, and wage guerrilla warfare. Exactly what the weapons and armor of Hittite soldiers was is not clear. The weapons used by the chariot-borne warriors were apparently the lance and bow. However, Hittite carved figures show warriors wearing only belted kilt and helmet, and carrying short sword and battle axes. And on Egyptian carvings, Hittite soldiers appear in long robes and armed with long spears. Perhaps these varied representations show the heterogeneous nature of Hittite forces, drawn as they were for a wide variety of peoples. The army which fought at the Battle of Kadesh, for example, the largest ever mustered by a Hittite king, included contingents from every part of his empire and from every possible ally and vassal. The Hittite army contained sappers in connection with the construction of fortifications for use in siege warfare. Prolonged sieges were sometimes required, and the Hittites had battering rams and siege towers. They were also masters of defense. Massive defensive walls surrounded their cities and fortresses, with gateways designed to make it as hard as possible to fight a way through. On the north and west frontiers of the empire, where wild tribes threatened to raid, lines of fortresses guarded Hittite territory. The garrison of these fortresses must have been permanent troops, rather than those mustered for a particular campaign. These garrison troops were probably made up of mercenaries, at least in part. In the accounts of the victories and conquests of Hittite kings, there is a complete absence of lust for torture and cruelty, which characterized the annals of Assyrian kings. There was no Hittite navy. This is somewhat surprising, as they possessed territories in Cyprus and traded extensively with that island. Hittite religion and mythology were heavily influenced by their Hattic, Mesopotamian, and Hurrian counterparts. In earlier times, Indo-European elements may still be clearly discerned. Storm gods were prominent in the Hittite pantheon. Tarhunt was referred to as the conqueror, the king of Cumia, king of heaven, and lord of the land of Hatti. As the god of battle and victory, especially against foreign powers, he was chief among the gods and was depicted as a bearded man astride two mountains and bearing a cub. After 1180 BCE, amid general turmoil in the Levant, associated with the sudden arrival of the Sea Peoples, the kingdom disintegrated into several independent Neo-Hittite city-states. The history of the Hittite civilization is known mostly from cuneiform texts found in the area of their kingdom and from diplomatic and commercial correspondence found in various archives in Egypt and the Middle East.